In the far edges of the galaxy, there was a planet no one dared to visit. Its skies were always dark with clouds, its mountains sharp like blades, and its caves deep as endless space. But this planet was not feared for its storms or its rocks. It was feared because of what lived inside it. The dragon cubs. They were the children of the legendary star dragons, being so powerful that even entire empires never tried to touch them. These cubs were young, but their claws could crush warships, and their fire could melt armor stronger than steel. Whole fleets had once been destroyed just by flying too close to their lair. The empires had a rule: never disturb the nest. Everyone obeyed it. But one day, fate disobeyed. A small human ship, tiny compared to the battleships of empires, was crossing near this forbidden space. It was not a warship, only an explorer's vessel. Inside were scientists, traders, and a single child named Myra. She was no warrior, no soldier. She was just a curious little girl with wide eyes and dreams of stars. Then the storm hit. A shower of meteors tore across the sky. The ship tried to escape, but the engines were weak. One by one, pieces of metal broke away. Warning alarms screamed. Lights died. And finally, with a long cry, the ship crashed down on the forbidden planet. Most of the crew survived, but the crash scattered them. Fires burned across the wreckage, and the adults rushed to put them out. In the chaos, no one noticed Myra wandering away. She was chasing a small glowing insect, like a floating star. It danced in the smoke and pulled her toward the mountains. Step by step, she followed, laughing softly to herself, too young to fear the dangers around her. The insect flew into a cave. Myra followed. And that was how she entered the lair of the dragon cubs. Inside, the cave was vast and glowing. Strange crystals hung from the walls, shining with blue light. Pools of liquid fire bubbled in the cracks of the stone. Myra's small feet echoed as she walked deeper and deeper. And then she saw them. Huge shadows moved in the darkness. Scales gleamed like silver moons. Eyes like burning suns opened one by one. The air grew hot, heavy, almost too thick to breathe. The dragon cubs had awakened. There were 5 of them, each larger than a house. Their wings stretched wide, brushing against the crystal walls. Smoke curled from their mouths, and sparks danced between their teeth. They had never seen a human before, only the fleets that attacked from the sky. To them, every outsider was an enemy. Myra did not know this. She yawned. Her little legs were tired from walking. She saw the cubs' giant forms, their glowing eyes, their sharp claws, but in her innocence, she thought they were simply big animals, like storybook creatures. "Hi," she whispered, her voice soft and sweet. The cubs tilted their heads. They had destroyed cruisers with a single breath, crushed fleets in the blink of an eye. Yet this tiny creature, smaller than their claws, had no fear. She rubbed her eyes, curled on the warm stone floor, and, before the cubs could move, she fell asleep. Silence filled the cave. The cubs growled low, confused. One stepped closer, its breath hot enough to burn metal. Another circled, its tail scraping the floor. They had no idea what to do. This human was not fighting, not screaming, not running. She was dreaming. The largest cub lowered its snout until it was only inches away. It sniffed, expecting fear. But all it smelled was the soft scent of a child, milk, dust, and sleep. No fear. No hate. For the first time in their short lives, the cubs did not attack. Instead, they lay down around her, their giant bodies forming a circle. Their wings folded in, creating a shield of living armor. The fire in their throats cooled to smoke. The untouchable cubs, feared by empires, became silent guardians of a sleeping child. Far above the planet, signals spread fast. The empires had seen the human ship fall. They waited for the dragon's fury to light up the sky. They expected the child to be ash in seconds. But no fire came. No roar echoed. Only silence. Something impossible had happened in the forbidden nest. The question spread across the stars like wildfire. Why had the dragon cubs spared a human child? In the cave, Myra stirred in her sleep. She turned, sighed, and hugged the claw of the nearest cub like it was a pillow. The great beast froze in shock, then slowly relaxed, its eyes softening. The untouchable cubs had shown mercy. And that mercy was about to change the galaxy forever. The planet outside the cave was silent, but the galaxy was not. From distant stations, from listening posts hidden in asteroid belts, and from the bridges of mighty warships, signals rushed across the stars. Every eye turned toward the forbidden world. Every ruler, Every admiral, every council of empires wanted to know. Why were the dragon cubs silent? They should have roared in fury. They should have burned the skies. But nothing happened. Whispers began to spread. A human ship fell, and a child entered the nest. Some called it impossible. Some called it a lie. Others feared it was true. Because if the dragons, untouchable, merciless, proud, had spared a human child, then the balance of power across the galaxy was about to change. Inside the cave, Myra slowly opened her eyes. The floor beneath her was warm, softer than stone, as if she was lying on a bed. She rubbed her eyes and yawned. And then she saw it, a giant golden eye staring right back at her. Myra froze. For a moment, her breath caught in her throat. Then she blinked, and smiled. "Hello," she said softly. The cub blinked too. Its head tilted to the side, smoke curling from its nostrils. It expected fear, but the child's voice was calm, almost happy. Myra stretched out her tiny hand and touched the cub's nose. The scales were warm, glowing faintly with inner fire. The cub flinched, but did not strike. Another cub crept closer, curious. Its claws scraped the stone. Myra giggled. "You're so big," she whispered. The cubs exchanged low growls, like thunder rolling across mountains. They were speaking to one another in their ancient tongue, trying to understand. No outsider had ever dared touch them. No outsider had ever greeted them without trembling. Yet this child acted as if they were nothing more than strange, oversized animals. Far above, the councils of the empires argued. One commander slammed his fist on the table. "If the cubs accept the child, then humans have a weapon none of us can face." Another voice hissed, "Or maybe the cubs are only waiting. Maybe they will kill the child in their own time." A third voice whispered, "But what if they don't? What if mercy has entered their blood?" For empires built on fear, the idea was more terrifying than fire. Back in the cave, Myra's small stomach growled. She had not eaten since the crash. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small ration bar, half broken from the fall. She unwrapped it, took a bite, and then, without thinking, broke off a piece and held it up to the nearest cub. "Want some?" she asked. The cub stared. Its nostrils flared. It leaned forward and sniffed. The food was tiny, nothing compared to the rivers of fire it usually drank. But still, it opened its mouth and carefully, gently, took the piece from her hand. The other cubs growled in protest. The first cub roared back, a short sharp sound that shook the cave. Then, to their shock, it lowered its head beside the child and licked its lips like a tame creature. Myra laughed. "You're funny." The sound of her laughter echoed through the lair. The cubs froze again, confused. No laughter had ever been heard in the forbidden nest. Only screams. Only silence. At the crash site, the surviving crew searched desperately. They found footprints leading into the mountains. Fear filled their hearts. "She went into the nest," one whispered. "No human comes back from there," another said grimly. But one man clenched his fists. "Then we must try." They sent a distress call. Across the galaxy, fleets prepared. Some ships claimed they were coming to rescue the child. Others admitted the truth. They wanted to see if the rumor was real. To test the dragons. To use the child as bait. The galaxy's eyes turned sharper, colder. The whispers grew louder. Back in the cave, Myra sat cross-legged on the stone floor. She was humming a soft tune, a lullaby she remembered from her mother. The cubs lay around her, tails twitching, wings folded, their glowing eyes fixed on her. The song was gentle, almost like flowing water. The cubs listened. Their hearts, made for battle and fire, felt something new. Something soft. Something that made their flames burn quieter. Myra yawned again. She leaned against the side of the largest cub and closed her eyes. Within minutes, she was asleep once more. The cubs lowered their heads, watching her breathing rise and fall. They did not move. They did not roar. For the second time, the untouchable cubs chose mercy. Far away, in the war councils of the galaxy, someone whispered the words that would spread like fire. The human child woke in the dragon's lair, and they did not harm her. The empires were no longer whispering in secret. Now they trembled aloud. The galaxy had never been so restless. In every star system, in every hidden base, the same rumor spread like wildfire. The dragon cubs had spared a human child. Admirals lost sleep. Councils argued without pause. Old warlords, who had once sworn they would never fear again, now stared into the darkness of space with trembling hands. For centuries, the dragons had been monsters, untouchable, merciless, feared by all. They accepted no tribute. They bowed to no empire. Their very cubs were strong enough to shatter fleets. And yet, in the forbidden nest, a human child had fallen asleep unharmed. What did it mean? On the world itself, inside the glowing crystal cave, Myra sat between the cubs. She hummed as she broke another ration bar in half and shared the pieces. The cubs were larger than houses, yet they lowered their heads as gently as kittens, careful not to hurt her with their sharp teeth. Myra laughed when one of them licked her hand with a tongue hot as a furnace. "You're silly," she said. The cub blinked, tilting its head like it almost understood. The others growled, jealous, until Myra offered them crumbs too. None of them had ever tasted food that was not fire. Yet they accepted it from her hands. To Myra, it was play. To the galaxy, it was unthinkable. At the edge of the forbidden world, fleets began to gather. Colossal warships, bristling with cannons, floated in orbit. Carriers released squadrons of fighters to patrol the skies. Some fleets belonged to human worlds, desperate to save the child. Others belonged to rival empires, watching closely, hungry for a chance to strike. In the council chambers of one empire, a tall figure slammed his staff on the ground. "If the cubs accept the human child, then humanity gains a bond none of us can match. Imagine an army with dragons at its side." Another counselor spat the words, "or worse. Imagine a child teaching dragons mercy. What will become of our fear then? How do you control a monster that learns kindness?" The chamber fell silent. For empires built on terror, the thought was more frightening than death. Back in the cave, Myra tried something new. She pulled out a small recorder, a toy she always carried. With a button press, it played soft earth music, a lullaby. The sound filled the cave. The cubs froze, their glowing eyes narrowing. The strange tune echoed off the crystal walls, bouncing like a song of another world. Myra swayed side to side and sang along. One cub, curious, lowered its head and rumbled softly, almost as if it wanted to join. Another tapped its claw against the stone, making a beat. For the first time, the forbidden nest was filled not with fire and roars, but with music. But peace never lasts. High above, a rescue drone descended, its engines whispering. It carried no weapons, only cameras and scanners. The humans on the broken ship had sent it to find Myra, praying she was alive. The drone floated into the cave entrance, its lights shining. The cubs growled instantly. Their wings spread, their bodies stiffened. To them, this machine was not a rescuer, it was a threat. One cub roared, shaking the crystals. Another swung its tail, smashing the drone into the wall. Sparks flew. Metal shattered. The machine died in seconds. Myra jumped, startled, and looked at her friends. The cub who destroyed the drone lowered its head, growling softly. Not at her, but at the machine. Protecting her. Myra touched its nose again, smiling. "It's okay. I'm fine." The cub blinked slowly. The growl faded. But the empires watching through the drone's final signal did not see kindness. They saw power. On every ship in orbit, alarms rang. The drone had been destroyed. Commanders panicked. "The cubs have chosen violence," one shouted. But another, calmer, leaned forward. "No, they destroyed only the drone. Look closer. They are guarding the child." The room fell silent again. The truth was too heavy. The cubs were not treating the child as prey. They were treating her as one of their own. Whispers turned into plans. Some leaders wanted to attack at once, to kill the cubs before their bond with the child grew deeper. Others demanded patience, hoping to use the child as a bridge between humans and dragons. And still others feared the most dangerous path of all, doing nothing and letting the bond grow unchecked. In the shadows, spies carried these arguments across the stars. Enemies prepared fleets. Rivals drew up secret weapons. Everyone wanted to be ready for the day the cubs left their nest. In the cave, Myra rested again against the warm scales of her guardians. She felt safe, safer than she had ever been on any ship or colony. She yawned, rubbed her eyes, and whispered softly before drifting into dreams. "You're my friends." The cubs did not know the words, but they understood the feeling. They curled tighter around her, their golden eyes watching the dark. The forbidden nest, once a place of fear, now held the strangest thing in the galaxy, trust. And far above, the empires trembled. For if dragons could trust, then no empire was safe. The galaxy held its breath. Above the forbidden world, fleets waited in orbit. Their cannons were armed, their engines humming. Commanders stared at their screens, watching for any sign of fire rising from the planet's surface. But in the nest, there was only silence. And a song. Myra's little voice echoed inside the glowing cave as she taught the cubs a tune. She clapped her hands to keep the beat, her laughter bouncing like light against the crystals. The cubs, giants feared by entire empires, sat in a circle around her. Their wings twitched, their tails tapped, their glowing eyes fixed on her every movement. When she clapped, they tried to copy her with thunderous slaps of claws against the stone. The sound shook the walls, making Myra giggle harder. "You're learning," she cheered. No one in the galaxy could have believed it. The untouchable dragon cubs, destroyers of fleets, were playing a child's game. Outside the cave, storms rolled across the mountains. Lightning tore through the sky. Yet inside, warmth grew. The cubs, once restless and violent, had grown calm around Myra. She told them stories of Earth, about forests, rivers, and skies that were blue instead of black. She described toys, picture books, and silly games. "You'd like swings," she said one day, kicking her legs as if she were already on one. "They go up and up, almost like flying." The cubs tilted their heads. They had never needed swings. They had wings. But they listened. They always listened. And in their listening, something changed. Their fire no longer burned just with hunger. It burned with curiosity. But the galaxy was not calm. In a hidden chamber aboard a warship, spies whispered to their commanders. "The child shares food with the cubs. The cubs protect her. They will not let anyone approach." The commander's jaw tightened. "Then we test them. Send a small fleet. Not to destroy, just to see what happens." And so, ships began to descend. Myra was telling a story when the ground rumbled. She looked up. The cubs lifted their heads at once, their ears twitching, their eyes glowing brighter. They heard the engines before she did. The air grew sharp. The cave trembled. Outside, lights flashed against the storm clouds. Warships. Myra's heart raced. She remembered the crash. She remembered fire in the sky. She pressed her hands to her chest and whispered, "It's them. They came back for me." The cubs growled low. Smoke curled from their mouths. To them, those lights were no rescue. They were invaders. One cub spread its wings, blocking the cave entrance. Another crouched low beside Myra, shielding her with its massive body. Their bond was clear. The child was theirs to protect. The first strike came without warning. A beam of white-hot energy lanced from the sky, slamming into the mountainside. Rocks shattered. Dust filled the air. Myra screamed as the cave shook, crystals falling from the ceiling. The cubs roared in unison, the sound so powerful it cracked the stone. Flames poured from their mouths, not at Myra, but toward the sky outside. The fire rose like a storm, colliding with the beam. Heat scorched the air. The attacking ships staggered. Their shields flickered. Commanders gasped as readings spiked. "They're defending the child," one officer cried. But still, the attack continued. Missiles rained, striking the cliffs. The ground split open, rivers of molten rock pouring out. Inside, Myra clung to the nearest cub. "Stop! Please!" she shouted, though her voice was drowned by the roars of battle. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She had wanted rescue. Instead, she had brought war. The cub she held against lowered its head, nuzzling her softly despite the chaos. Its golden eye met hers. For a moment, the world outside vanished. "You're not monsters," she whispered. The cub growled low, almost like an answer. Far above, in the command ship, officers watched in awe. "The cubs are not attacking at random," one said. "They're shielding her." Another slammed his fist down. "This is dangerous. If they see her as one of their own, then humanity has gained something no empire can challenge." The order came cold: retreat. "We've seen enough. But prepare the next step. If the dragons grow stronger, we cannot allow them to live." The ships pulled back into orbit, leaving smoke and fire in their wake. When silence returned, Myra sat in the ruined cave. Ash fell like snow around her. The cubs stood in a circle, their wings wrapped protectively, their bodies scarred but unbroken. She touched one of their claws, her voice trembling. "You saved me." The cubs growled softly, like thunder rolling in the distance. Outside, the The stars flickered with the glow of fleets preparing for the next war. The empires had seen enough to fear. The dragons had seen enough to protect. And Myra, small and fragile, had become the bridge between them, though she did not yet know it. That night, as she lay against the warmth of the largest cub, she whispered drowsily, "I'll keep you safe too." The cubs lowered their heads, their fire dimming into embers. For the first time in history, dragons had listened to a promise not of tribute, not of fear, but of friendship. And beyond the clouds, the galaxy trembled at what that promise meant. The night did not last. By dawn, the air itself seemed heavier. The mountains groaned as if something deep beneath them was waking. Even the cubs grew restless, pacing the cave, their wings twitching nervously. Myra rubbed her sleepy eyes. She had never seen them like this. "What's wrong?" she whispered. The cubs didn't answer, but their gazes kept turning toward the far side of the cavern, where cracks of red light pulsed through the rock. It was like the heartbeat of the world itself. And then the ground split. A roar erupted, vast, ancient, and endless. It was not the sound of a single beast. It was the fury of an age. The parents of the cubs had awakened. The mountain burst apart as two colossal shapes emerged. Their scales glowed brighter than suns, each claw larger than a battleship. Wings unfolded, blotting out the sky. Eyes like burning stars swept across the land, searching, judging. Every ship in orbit trembled. Commanders barked frantic orders. Some tried to retreat. Others, blinded by fear, prepared to fire. But no weapon mattered now. The star dragons had risen. From her place inside the cave, Myra felt the air vibrate in her chest. She clutched one of the cubs, her tiny body shaking. The cubs roared back at their parents, not in challenge but in warning. They spread their wings wide, forming a protective wall around her. The great dragon's eyes narrowed. Smoke poured from their jaws. To them, humans were nothing, fragile sparks of life, barely worth notice. Yet here was one, hidden among their young. The galaxy had trespassed. And the galaxy would pay. The first strike came without hesitation. A single beat of the star dragon's wings sent a shockwave into orbit. Ships shattered instantly, torn apart as if they were made of paper. The blast rippled across the void, flipping entire fleets end over end. Thousands of lives vanished in silence. The second dragon opened its jaws, releasing a torrent of flame that leapt beyond the atmosphere. A wall of fire devoured cruisers, frigates, and carriers alike. The night sky turned into a second sun, burning brighter than any star. Commanders screamed into comms, "Retreat! Retreat!" But it was useless. Engines melted, shields collapsed, and fleets were reduced to glowing wreckage that rained back onto the planet. Myra screamed as fire lit the skies. She covered her ears, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Stop! Please, stop!" The cubs pressed closer, their roars mixing with hers. One nudged her gently with its snout, urging her to stay calm. But the destruction did not slow. Empires that had stood for centuries, proud and untouchable, now broke apart in minutes. The arrogance of rulers, the power of armadas, all burned away in the wrath of the star dragons. Far across the galaxy, transmissions spread. Fleets watching from distant systems saw the live feeds before they cut to static. Words echoed across command halls and royal chambers. The dragons are awake. Panic spread. Empires quarreled, blaming one another, while common people whispered of doom. For generations, they had spoken of the star dragons as legend. Now legend had become fire and death. And yet, in the middle of it all, the cubs stood their ground. As their parents descended toward the lair, their roars shaking the mountains, the cubs wrapped themselves tighter around Myra. Their eyes burned with defiance. They would not let her be destroyed, not even by their own kind. The great dragons landed, shaking the earth. Their claws dug into stone, carving trenches as deep as rivers. They leaned down, jaws glowing with molten fire, ready to incinerate anything unworthy. Myra froze. She could not breathe. The heat seared her skin. She was nothing before them. Nothing but a fragile child. But the cubs roared. The sound was not just noise, it was command. It was plea. It was love. And the parents paused. For the first time in living memory, the star dragons hesitated. Their fire dimmed. Their eyes narrowed, confused. They saw the human child clinging to their offspring. They saw the cubs shielding her with their bodies. Why? Their gaze seemed to ask. Why protect this tiny creature? Myra's voice cracked as she forced herself to speak. Please, she whispered, lifting her trembling hands. They saved me. They're not monsters. They're my friends. The words were too small, too soft, to matter in the scale of galaxies. But in that cave, they carried weight. The cubs lowered their heads beside her, echoing her plea with low, rumbling growls. And the parents did not strike. Above, the remaining fleets fled, broken and terrified. No one dared stay. No one dared provoke further wrath. But rumors already spread like fire. The Star Dragons had spared a human child. Not for tribute. Not for fear. But because their own young demanded it. The galaxy trembled. Armies that once thought themselves strong now wondered if strength was enough. Rulers questioned their own power. And in the nest, Myra curled up between the cubs, the firelight dimming as exhaustion overcame her. The great dragons remained, watching silently. Their wrath had shaken the stars. But in their silence lay a question that no empire could answer. Had mercy truly touched even them? The battlefield was silent. Where fleets once filled the sky, only drifting wreckage remained. Charred fragments of ships tumbled in orbit, glowing faintly like falling stars. Whole empires had come to test their power against the Star Dragons, and in minutes they had been reduced to ash. But in the cave, there was no ash. Only warmth. Myra lay between the cubs, her tiny form wrapped in their massive wings. The little girl had cried until she could cry no more, and now she slept, safe in the embrace of creatures the galaxy feared. The parents watched her in silence. Their eyes, molten suns that had seen empires rise and fall, now rested on a single fragile child. They had destroyed fleets without mercy, but here their fire dimmed. For the cubs had chosen. And the parents could not ignore that choice. Word spread faster than light. Messengers carried the tale to every corner of the galaxy. The untouchable dragon cubs spared a human child. Worlds that once trembled at the dragon's name now whispered in awe. Not because of destruction, but because of restraint. No empire had ever earned such mercy. No fleet had ever been spared. But a child, small, helpless, ordinary, had been shielded by the untouchable. In royal courts, rulers argued. Some claimed it was weakness, others a dangerous sign of change. But among the common people, hope bloomed. If even dragons could show mercy, perhaps the galaxy was not ruled only by fear. Days passed. Myra awoke to find the cubs still by her side. They nudged her gently, offering bits of roasted meat, treasures pulled from the ruins of fallen ships, and shiny stones from the mountains. To them, these were gifts worthy of family. She laughed, hugging them in return. "Thank you," she whispered, and though the cubs could not speak her language, they seemed to understand. For the first time in their lives, the untouchable cubs were thanked not with tribute, not with fear, but with love. And they wept, not with tears, but with fire softened to embers. Above, the parents lingered. They circled the skies, watching the fleets scatter like insects. They could have hunted them to extinction. They could have crushed every empire that dared send ships. But they did not. For when they looked back at the nest, they saw the cubs curled around Myra. They saw a child stroking scaled snouts with tiny hands, unafraid. They saw something they had never seen before, their children at peace. And so, for the first time in 1,000 years, the Star Dragons did not burn. They let the galaxy live. In distant halls of power, this mercy struck harder than fire. Admirals stared at maps of broken fleets, knowing no defense remained. Rulers whispered in fear, asking, if the dragons did not kill us, then why? Some feared manipulation. Others feared the unknown. But the wisest among them understood the truth. It was not fear that saved them. It was a child's kindness. Back in the nest, Myra sat on a crystal stone, humming the lullaby she had sung days ago. The cubs listened, swaying their massive heads to the rhythm. "You're not monsters," she told them softly. "You're just lonely." The cubs blinked, lowering their heads until their foreheads touched the ground. To them, her words were not small. They were truth. For the first time, the cubs felt seen, not as weapons, not as terrors, but as living beings. And so, history shifted. Where once the galaxy feared the untouchable cubs, now they spoke of the bond that no empire could command. Songs were written of the child who fell asleep in their lair and woke to mercy. Tales spread of the day dragons spared when they had no reason to spare. Even in the darkest corners, rebels and dreamers whispered, if a child's kindness can tame dragons, what else is possible? The great dragons, however, remained apart. They returned to their mountain, their fury cooled but not forgotten. They would defend their young forever. Yet the cubs had shown them something greater than fire, the strange strength of gentleness. And Myra, small, fragile, and human, had become a bridge between worlds. She would never know how many lives her simple thank you had saved. She would never see the countless rulers trembling in their thrones. She only knew the cubs were her friends. And to the dragons, that was enough. That night, as the stars shone bright above the mountains, Myra curled once more against the cubs. Their warm breaths surrounded her like a living fortress. The galaxy feared them still. But she only smiled. "Good night," she whispered. The cubs rumbled softly, not with hunger, not with rage, but with peace. And in that peace, the galaxy changed forever. For the first time in history, the star dragons had wept not from rage, but from mercy.